Welcome back, everybody, to another great episode of the Golden Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Voss. You can find me here and on Golden K Pod on all social media. I love that we have this interview series going. Every Friday, we're dropping a new interview. And in fact, if you're watching this, you've already watched my interview with Brennan Pope earlier today. I'm so grateful for you watching and liking and subscribing. My guest for you today is a person who studies molecular biology and biotechnology at the University of Houston, Clear Lake, And you can also find him on shows such as The Atheist Experience and The Line. It's Dragnauct. How are you?
Hi, how are you doing today?
Very, very well. Very well. We have a nice day today, finally, here in Chicago. We have a day that's in the mid 40s instead of 7 degrees. So we're good.
Yeah.
So today's subject matter with Dragnauct is going to be Young Earth Creationists and kind of how that works in the mentality of a lot of believers, and then also trying to tie in a few things with science related as well. So Dragnauct, take it away. What is it? What issues do you see most prevalent with Young Earth Creationism?
Oh, wow. So inherently, I guess just based on sort of my experience with a lot of Young Earth Creationists, a lot of them seem to be convinced that what they believe is science. And I hate to break it to them, it's not. It's actually, if you break down sort of what a Young Earth Creationist sort of does, is that they have sort of a predefined destination or conclusion that they have to draw. There's no checking. There's no sort of invalidating any sort of thing that would sort of smack of the scientific process. It's almost diametrically opposed to it. And so what you have are people who are sorely mistaken in their beliefs in most cases, and especially the one where they're claiming that because they have a strong belief and there's a certain number of them that has this belief, that all of a sudden you can just sort of poof things into existence, and that equals science.
So what is it that you find most often being on, let's say, Atheist Experience or The Line, trying to do these shows where they deal right with the people themselves, when it's a Young Earth Creationist, whether it's, any kind of presuppositionalist? How is that in real time, dealing with someone who has those beliefs and has that, because so many people believe it, I think I'm justified in believing it too. How do you deal with that in real time? What is that mental state like for you?
It can be frustrating, depending on sort of where that person is in their sort of theological walk. You have to sort of gauge where they're at, where they're coming from. Some people are just like straight clones of Ken Hovind, for instance, and they're just sort of regurgitating things ad nauseum, and they don't have really any strong background or even a cursory background in the topic, such as a famous one, or I should say infamous one, Atangelo, for instance. I've encountered him numerous times over the years, and he understands my background. He knows that I have quite a few years, studying chemistry. And so when you're encountering someone like Atangelo, and you sort of scratch the surface with some of the questions like that he likes to ask, he can't actually answer them because he himself has no idea, what would constitute the very thing that he's trying to mention, and without getting to too many specifics. So if you're running into someone who's just absolutely recalcitrant like that, then it can be frustrating. But it's probably more challenging to talk to someone who is just genuinely mistaken. Like they just have been misinformed for many, many years into thinking that young creationism is science and that what they believe is actually fact. And so it's almost heartbreaking to sort of tell them that, no, you have been essentially lied to. And that can be, it's rough. Emotionally, it is rough because you can sort of hear it in their voice that they start to realize what they believed and the people that they trust have sort of misled them.
Is it something that you would chalk up to a bit of misinformation or maybe miseducation? I'm not sure what you would chalk up a lot of this idealism towards Young Earth Creationists. What do they, how do they come to this point? Because even when I was a Christian, as a former Christian, I never was a Young Earth Creationist, even though I was a Christian and believed there was a God that existed, or at least the Christian God that existed. I never believed in 6 days of creation. I never took that as literal, because at the same time, I also loved physics. And so it wasn't like it ever clashed for me, though, understanding that the the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, roughly. The universe is roughly 13.8 billion years old. That didn't really clash for me. So I'm wondering, how do people arrive at this? Is it taking things literally, or is it miseducation, or both?
It's a combination of those things. It's actually pretty multifaceted. If the person, and this is just from my own personal experience, if the person themselves value education, they'll sort of seek more information even about theology, right? They'll try to say, they may not go to seminary or whatever, but they will try to pick up biblical concordances and so on and so forth. And so that type of person is least likely to be a young earth creationist. Someone who's not as educated, not as interested, and not as curious, they're more often than not young earth creationists, because it gives them very simple answers to very complex scenarios.
What is let's say for a young earth creationist that you've heard personally, since we are talking to you, we're not talking to anybody else on the Atheist Experience or anybody, since I'm talking to you personally, what is the most disruptive idea you've seen from a young earth creationist that completely flies right in the face of science?
Go
ahead.
That's actually a pretty good question. I would say probably probably up there is the fact that evolution to them just does not exist, and I have to qualify that. Their version of evolution is literally Pokemon evolution. It's both humorous and also pretty interesting, given that we can record even in our lifetime different species evolving. But it's such a hard topic to tackle, because most young earth creationists don't understand that what they profess to be evolution is in fact misinterpretation. So you have to start at very, very, very basic levels to try and disabuse them of some of these concepts, such as they're looking for what I call gross anatomical changes to happen from one organism into another, almost like the metamorphosis in a way, but across a population, which that just doesn't happen. And so trying to disabuse them of that, and then try to educate them and try to find out where some of these cognitive biases come in, that's incredibly difficult. And I would say that one right there is probably the toughest challenge in real time.
Yeah, I've actually heard there's a few things that I've heard about young earth creationists talking about evolution. One thing that I run on a Clubhouse, which is my Ask an Atheist rooms. And I have people say to me, well, I didn't come from a monkey.
Right.
And you also hear that you can't randomly assemble a car, and there's all these different almost misleading things that they're saying. Why is it, and that, minus the car example for right now, let's just isolate the I didn't come from a monkey example. What is it that they are essentially completely misunderstanding about what is stated about evolution, or Homo sapiens in particular, from their ancestry?
Well, they're trying to sort of disavow any sort of idea that we have a common ancestry with primates, which it's demonstrably false. And so this line of, well, I didn't come from a monkey, is just sort of their way of to insult the concept of common ancestry. But what I found is challenging it head on isn't very effective. What I like to do is I like to let them teach me, you put that in air quotes, teach me what they know. And then once I understand a bit better where their misunderstanding is, then I can try to fill in the gaps with the actual information that they can go and check as well. So I said, okay, for instance, if you didn't come from a monkey, okay, so what sort of so I said genetically, right? If we were to take a monkey's genome and ours, what would you expect if we did share a common ancestor? Now, you would imagine there would be a lot of similarity between our genomes if that were the case. And that's sort of kind of how we figure out that we're related to one another. And so now the ball is in their park. And so now they have to come up with a standard, some type of metric to determine whether or not something's related to something else. But they have to be very careful, because they could also end up tripping over themselves and denying familial ancestry within our species, such as, doing DNA tests and that sort of thing.
So with that, I mean, as far as I understand it, and I might be misunderstanding this, as far as I understand it, there is an ape-like common ancestor between Homo sapiens and chimpanzees. But am I correct in that?
Roughly, yes. Yeah, the further you go back, I should say the more narrow those trees get. But yes, there for all primates, including us, there's a common ancestor that we all come from.
Okay. So from that, also now moving on to the assembly, and this is where you see with even Young Earth Creationists, you see a lot of design arguments coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And this looks designed, and how can we just have a wind blow by and reassemble an airplane or a car? What is it that they're not getting about that? About how things may look designed, but through natural occurrences, processes can happen. I kind of gave up the answer by accident, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's a fun topic to explore and say, okay, well, let's hypothetically, let's say that there's two universes, right? One universe there's a God, one universe there's not a God. Everything's the same. That's the only difference. We see the same structures, we see the same whatever. How would you tell which universe that you're in using what you know now? They have no actual metric in order to determine what is, quote unquote, design versus not. I don't know what an undesigned universe looks like. I would have no idea, as opposed to a design one. Even if I were to buy the God thing, how do we know specifically that God did not allow nature to form these shapes and that you're just sort of attributing that to whatever? We have no idea, and neither do they. So I think for this sort of question, it's best to sort of go back and sit down and determine how did they come to this conclusion. Obviously, they have to say that there's a God, but if I'm in a lab and I say that, well, this enzyme is doing X, I have to create a metric in order to determine what that is. For instance, in my lab, I can determine whether or not there's an aberrant occurrence of some type of enzymatic activity by the presence or absence of hydrogen ions. And so through me looking at hydrogen ions in a solution before and after an experiment, I can determine what's happened. You can't do that with Young Earth Creationism, especially in this case. So you're making what's known as a qualitative assessment of whatever it is that you're observing. How would you then apply some sort of metric to that and then turn that into something that's actually scientific? That's incredibly difficult because it's subjective. I can say that a rock that I could pick up off the ground was designed. I could say that the mountain comprised of whatever minerals was designed. I could do that for anything, but I could also have the next person say that it's not. So who's right?
And that's kind of my next question leading in. Actually, you kind of answered it for me a little bit, but I was wondering, what is the biggest drawback you see with a presuppositionalist believer who happens to be a Young Earth Creationist? What is the main harm that you see in that when they go on to, let's say, higher learning, or they go to college, or they go to get a job afterwards, after school? What is it that they could run into problem-wise by being a presuppositionalist Young Earth Creationist?
Well, realistically, there's only a handful of assignments or tests or stuff that's really going to challenge their beliefs. It's actually quite amazing when you think about it. So they can skate by. They can answer everything that they think happens in the world from a Young Earth Creationist view, and still pass. But they're going to have a bit of an issue if they have a project, and that project is 30% of their grade, and they're just putting in all Young Earth Creationist nonsense from whomever, like this AIG or something like that. Like that's not a proper reference that's going to be accepted. So they could get a lower grade. But as far as academia is concerned, there are quite a few Christians, that, or I should say theists, that do believe all the same stuff. But as far as when it comes down to the science, that's when you see that sort of thing disappear. And that's why you have certain people like Ken Hovind, that they don't exist in an actual university. The only person that I can think of that sort of holds some of these views is Dr. James Tour, actually here in Texas. But his Young Earth Creationism is relegated to something outside of his actual field, because he does or inorganic chemistry, I think, with the synthetic chemistry. So the stuff that he actually deals with isn't even a part of his theology. And so luckily he's able to sort of profess the things that he does, and it didn't have really big of an impact on his work.
It's funny that you mentioned Ken Hovind, because I was just about to ask you the Hovinds and William Lane Craigs and Tureks. I'm wondering, do the people like that hurt the progress or the possible progress in the future of current day young earth creationists? Does that hurt by listening to, and I'm not saying hurt as in, you should just bash someone, but I'm saying, does it hurt their mental state to where they may never come out of that young earth creationist mindset to be able to learn something new that would conflict with what they currently believe? Is listening to them doing that?
Yeah, I think to a degree. Depends on how long someone's been an acolyte of some of them. I will credit William Lane Craig. He's able to course correct and take on board new information. Ken Hovind, however, is someone who is so deeply invested in what he believes that he has to make sure that there's weird little purity tests. If you ever talk to anyone who's escaped his compound, there's a certain homogenous mindset that you have to have, and it even pertains to him as a person, that I think is incredibly damaging for anybody to be around. It's essentially a own mini cult. So I would say that it's unique to the person. I would be more concerned with Ken Hovind over William Lane Craig, especially given Ken Hovind's lengthy criminal history and continued criminal history. But I think there's definitely a strong correlation there.
What is it that you see for the future then? Before I ask you the final question that I normally ask, what is it that you see for the future of the discussion between, because of course, if you didn't want to have the discussion, you wouldn't be on shows like Ask an Atheist, or excuse me, that's my show, Atheist Experience and The Line. You wouldn't be on those shows if you didn't want to have this discussion. What is your, what is your drive to be on those shows? And also, what furthers the discussion, as a secondary question, what furthers the discussion between atheists and theists in the future?
Well, I will say that my first appearance was just sort of happenstance. Me and Matt were at a conference together, and he was like, "Oh, we definitely do need a science head person." So that I'm paraphrasing, and so he's like, "Yeah, we'll come on AXP." I was like, "Sure." But my continued appearances is mainly I want there to be more visibility, definitely more as egghead science people to sort of appear and go, hey, you know what? You don't have to be a scientist in order to debunk young earth creationism. Definitely showing also that, you can be someone of color and be an atheist, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's also very, very important to me. But I think progressing the conversation and challenging ideas is always a good thing in every facet, just not, religious versus non-religious. That's always a great thing. And so showing people that you can do that in a cordial setting is more than beneficial. Just sort of opening people up, just to get them out of just myopic mindset. Even fellow non-believers, just challenging your beliefs will always make you sort of a better person. And yeah, so that's. And I'm sorry, I just forgot your second question.
Well, no, you actually answered both. So
I did. Okay.
you did. You took care of both. The last question that I do ask is, if you have either social media or somewhere that people can reach you for, let's say, the Atheist Experience or The Line, or you personally for any more questions based on the scientific field that you're involved with right now, how can people reach you? What's the best way to reach you?
I have several social media accounts, mostly on Facebook and YouTube. So my personal YouTube is just sort of just based on nonsensical drama. I react to YouTubers and videos and stuff like that. But for the sort of the non-believer versus believer discussion, definitely you guys can email the Atheist Experience and request me. Don't email Matt. The Experience has its own email. Don't email Matt. Unless it's making fun of me, you have funny memes, and definitely send Matt that. But and so that's honestly how to get me back on. I usually get contacted by one of the volunteers, and they'll say, "Hey, people asking for you." So then we'll set up a time and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do too many podcasts and stuff like this anymore because I'm in the latter semesters of my thesis, and so it's kind of a critical time. But I definitely do plan on going back on AXP. Those of you who want to see me in person, and you're familiar with Black Non-Believers, run by Mandisa Thomas, I am one of the presenters, actually, along with T-Jump and a few others, at BNBCon, excuse me, and that's going to be next November. And I think that yes, I think she's already put out the flyers for that. So definitely look forward to that.
I like that you mentioned T-Jump. Actually, he's coming on the show later this month.
Okay,
so
cool.
that'll be a fun one as well. Thank you so much, Dragnauct, for coming on the show today and taking time away from your busy schedule to be a guest on the Golden Knowledge podcast.
Oh, not a problem. It's my pleasure.
So if you guys missed any of his links, any of his social media, don't worry about it. I've got you covered. All of the links below in the description. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, the Golden Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Voss, and we'll see you in the next interview.